A baby, barely breathing, discarded like yesterday's trash in the cold woods. No blanket, no bottle, just silence, frost, and slow fading life. No one saw him except two retired canines and the man they still followed. A police chief, hardened by duty, now staring down the most heartbreaking case of his life. What happened next will shatter you and then heal you. A story of loyalty, love, and a rescue no one saw coming. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe in the unbreakable bond between dogs and humans, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another soul-stirring story. Now, take a deep breath and join us for a tale you'll never forget. The wind was still over Marlow Creek that night, a sleepy mountain town nestled against the edge of the Sierra Nevada range in Northern California. Fog hung low between the pines, coiling like soft fingers around the forest floor. The air smelled of damp leaves and cold stone, sharp, earthy, and quiet. November had crept in silently, bringing with it the first real bite of winter. No snow yet, just a dry chill and the threat of frost. The forest was hushed, save for the crunch of boots on fallen pine needles and the soft breath of animals in the dark. Police Chief David Carter moved at a steady, methodical pace along an unlit path that snaked through the forest. He was in his 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength in his posture and an economy to his movements. Years of service had carved soft lines into his face, testament to the many nights spent responding to domestic calls, search and rescue missions, or simply walking the quiet places to remind the town that someone was watching. His uniform was worn but clean, his boots practical and broken in. A utility flashlight bounced gently from his belt as he walked. Beside him strode Rex, a retired German Shepherd K9. Rex was large, well-built, with a thick black and tan coat and a grizzled, intelligent face. His left shoulder bore a barely visible scar from an incident that had ended his active duty. Now, 7 years old, Rex no longer tackled suspects or tracked fugitives. Instead, he walked at David's side each night as a trusted partner, no longer bound by orders, but still faithfully vigilant. Trailing a few steps behind was Apollo, a younger German shepherd with sleek lines, gold-ringed eyes, and an eager, alert energy. Just 3 years old, Apollo was in the final stages of her K9 training. She watched Rex's every movement like a student trailing a master. More agile than Rex, but less experienced, Apollo often held herself back, always waiting for cues, learning the rhythm of field work in silence. David liked these late-night walks. The town was quiet, the radio mostly silent, and the air free of the pressure that came with paperwork or administrative meetings. Out here, he could breathe. His dogs could stretch their legs. No one expected anything to happen, not in Marlow Creek. That was why, when Rex suddenly stopped walking, David's senses sharpened instantly. Rex's body went rigid, ears perked, nose twitching. Apollo halted beside him, mimicking the older dog's alert stance. David narrowed his eyes and looked around. Nothing moved, nothing spoke. Then Rex let out a sharp bark. Not aggressive, not startled. It was a signal clear, urgent, purposeful. David's hand instinctively unclipped the leash. "Find it," he said calmly. Rex took off at a fast trot, his paws silent on the soft forest floor. Apollo followed, silent and precise. David moved quickly after them, sweeping his flashlight beam through the trees. The woods grew denser for a few hundred feet, then opened into a shallow clearing beneath a tangle of old oaks. Rex was already there, standing absolutely still in the middle of the clearing, head lowered. Apollo stood nearby, her gaze darting into the surrounding shadows, her ears twitching like antennae. David approached slowly. At first, he didn't see what Rex was looking at. Then his light caught something, a lump on the ground, wrapped in what looked like an old grayish blanket. He dropped to one knee beside it, heart suddenly hammering. It was a baby, tiny, frail. So still at first, he feared it was already gone. David dropped his flashlight and reached out gently, peeling the blanket aside. The child's skin was icy to the touch, the cheeks hollow, lips tinged with blue. But just as he pressed 2 fingers lightly to the chest, he felt it, a weak, erratic flutter of breath. Alive. The baby gave a tiny whimper, so faint it barely registered, but it was enough. David let out a sharp breath. "Hang on, little one." Rex remained just a foot away, his eyes fixed on the infant, his body tense but unmoving. He didn't bark again. He didn't whine. He just watched, his intelligent gaze saying more than words ever could. Apollo crept in closer, sniffing the blanket, then sat down, eyes still darting between David and the dark tree line. David unzipped his jacket and wrapped it gently around the baby. The fabric dwarfed the tiny body, but it would hold in whatever warmth remained. Carefully, he lifted the child, pressing it against his chest, feeling the fragile life struggle beneath the layers. He clicked his radio on. "Dispatch, this is Chief Carter. I've located an infant alive but hypothermic and dehydrated. Immediate medical attention required. I'm en route to vehicle for transport. GPS coordinates incoming." The dispatcher's voice crackled back in confirmation, but David wasn't listening. He was already moving, retracing his steps through the woods, flashlight swinging low, boots crunching leaves in a quicker rhythm. Rex trotted beside him, casting occasional glances up at the bundle in his arms. Apollo followed closely at David's flank, glancing back every few steps as if to make sure nothing was following them. They didn't speak. They didn't stop. The forest that had once felt so peaceful now held its breath. By the time the patrol car came into view through the trees, David's arms had gone numb from the cold and from holding the baby so carefully. But he didn't falter. As the headlights washed over him, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone, "You're safe now. We've got you." He reached the car, and that's where the chapter ends. The patrol car tore through the winding mountain road, tires humming against the damp asphalt, as Police Chief David Carter gripped the steering wheel with both hands. The cabin of the cruiser was filled with the scent of pine, winter air, and the faint musk of dogs. The child, so tiny, fragile, and pale, was cradled in David's arms just moments ago, and now lay swaddled in a folded thermal blanket in the back seat, carefully cushioned in the warmth of David's own patrol jacket. His shallow breathing was barely perceptible, but it was still there. Each flicker of his chest a small miracle against the silence of the forest he had been found in. Rex, seated beside the child, held himself completely still. The 7-year-old German Shepherd had seen his share of emergencies, drug busts, armed standoffs, rescue ops, but none had been as eerily delicate as this. His thick coat rustled faintly as he adjusted his position, inching a little closer toward the child without touching him, his deep amber eyes never leaving the baby's small form. There was something in his gaze that went beyond duty. It was quiet, watchful devotion, the kind that could not be trained, only earned through a lifetime of loyalty. In the passenger seat, Apollo sat rigid, her young body taut with tension. The 3-year-old German Shepherd was smaller than Rex, more streamlined, with dark markings that seemed to frame her face in a permanent look of intensity. Her ears were standing straight, eyes scanning the passing scenery with sharp precision. Every shadow along the tree line, every flicker of a mailbox or passing post drew her attention. Her breath came fast but steady through her nose, fogging the glass in front of her in small bursts. She did not look at the baby. Her role, she understood in instinct alone, was to guard the perimeter, to be ready. The interior of the cruiser was silent, no radio chatter, no barking. Only the faint rumble of the engine and the ticking of the dashboard clock filled the space. David had turned off the sirens. This was not a pursuit. This was a race against something quieter, colder, time. He kept checking the rearview mirror, eyes darting from the winding road to the tiny figure bundled in the back. His chest was tight. Every instinct in him, trained and hardened over years of police work, was now screaming in helpless anticipation. The child didn't cry. That was worse somehow. Babies should cry. "You're okay," David muttered under his breath, as much to himself as to the child. "You're okay. Just hold on." Rex flicked an ear toward the sound of his voice, but didn't shift his gaze. The dog's expression didn't change. His whole focus remained fixed on the child, as though by sheer will he could keep the infant breathing. Apollo let out a short huff, not a growl, not a bark, just a sound, low and alert. David glanced at her, saw the way she was leaning forward slightly, ears still scanning. Her breathing was a little faster now, but not panicked, just tuned into the moment, to the tension vibrating through the vehicle. David knew that Apollo wasn't just reacting to the road or the speed. She could feel his pulse. She could sense the tension in the way he gripped the wheel, the shallow breaths he tried to control. Like all good K9s, Apollo wasn't just a tool, she was a mirror, a barometer for emotional weather, And right now, the storm was very real. Fog gathered at the lower elevations of the road, curling over the asphalt in pale ribbons. As the cruiser crested the final ridge overlooking the town, the lights of Marlow Creek glimmered in the valley below, soft, yellow, distant. David eased his foot off the accelerator slightly but kept the speed steady. No sirens, but no delays. Every few seconds, he checked the rear again, still breathing, barely. The patrol car began its descent into the heart of the town. The streets were quiet, as expected. This part of California rarely stayed awake past 10. A few porch lights glowed behind frost-rimmed windows, the occasional holiday wreath already hanging on doors, even though Thanksgiving hadn't come yet. David turned onto the main road. The hospital was still 2 minutes away. Apollo shifted in her seat, ears flicking. She gave another short exhale, like a runner keeping pace before a sprint. The young dog's shoulders rose and fell quickly. Her body knew this was not normal. This was not a routine patrol. This was something else, something urgent and delicate. Rex blinked slowly, then lowered his head slightly, resting his chin an inch from the baby's bundled form. He made no sound. There was no need. His stillness was its own language, a message of presence, of protection. David's heart thudded behind his badge. A lifetime of experience couldn't prepare him for the sheer fragility of what lay behind him. "You've got this," he whispered again. "Just stay with me." They passed the last intersection before the hospital, 2 lights away now. The streetlights overhead flickered faintly through the fog, casting long silver bars across the windshield. For a moment, David felt the surreal weight of what had just unfolded only minutes before in the forest. How impossible it seemed that a life could be left like that. That this child was breathing at all was a miracle. That Rex had found him in time-divine providence. Then, in the rearview mirror, he saw the baby twitch. A small movement, but it sent a jolt of hope up David's spine. Not a cry, not a shiver. Just a flicker of motion, like a hand remembering what it meant to reach. Rex noticed it too. His ears flicked. His nose moved an inch closer. David's voice caught in his throat. "Come on, little guy. Come on." He turned the wheel gently into the driveway of Marlow Creek General, headlights washing across the emergency entrance. The automatic doors glowed pale gold. Behind them, unseen hands began to stir. The cruiser rolled to a halt. David reached back without hesitation, unbuckled the belt, restraining the baby's makeshift cradle, and lifted the bundle with both hands. The child weighed almost nothing, still so cold, still so silent. Rex jumped out first as the door opened, landing softly, standing guard. Apollo didn't wait for a command. She followed instantly, then paused at the vehicle's flank, eyes scanning the dark parking lot for anything out of place. Even now, she remained focused, professional. David held the baby close to his chest, his arms tightening just a little, as if sheer warmth and will could sustain the tiny body even a few seconds longer. And then he walked quickly toward the doors. The automatic doors of Marlow Creek General slid open with a soft hiss, letting in the cold night air and a wave of urgency. David Carter stepped through first, cradling the infant tightly to his chest. His boots clicked briskly against the tile floor as he moved through the empty waiting area and into the fluorescent glow of the ER corridor. Behind him, Rex followed in steady strides, his tail low, his eyes trained ahead. Apollo trotted just slightly behind, ears flicking with every sound, her muscles taut beneath her dark coat. At the nurse's station, a woman in teal scrubs looked up from her clipboard. She was in her early 30s, with sharp cheekbones and tired hazel eyes behind square glasses. Her name tag read, Olivia Lang, and she carried herself with the deliberate calm of someone who had grown used to the chaos of an ER. Olivia was slender and tall, her dark hair tied back in a tight bun. Her demeanor was clinical, efficient, but beneath that surface was a woman shaped by grief. Years ago, she had lost her younger brother to an accident no hospital could reverse. Since then, her empathy had grown quieter, more internalized, something she rarely expressed, but never let go of. When Olivia saw the infant, her expression shifted in an instant. She came around the counter in long strides. "Male?" she asked quickly. David nodded. "Found in the woods, hypothermic, breathing but weak." Olivia didn't hesitate. "Bay 3, let's go." She gestured to an open room with a clean bassinet and warm lights. 2 other nurses, a young black woman named Jayla, with a buzzed haircut and nimble hands, and Paul, A soft-spoken man in his 40s with a calm energy appeared, with a warming blanket, oxygen equipment, and IV kits. Neither spoke unnecessarily. Their movements were swift, practiced. David placed the baby down gently onto the prepared table as Olivia and her team moved in like clockwork. Rex stopped just short of the entrance and lay down at the threshold, his front paws aligned, body still. He watched the infant without blinking. Apollo stayed beside him, her ears still twitching toward every sound. Olivia glanced once at the dogs, particularly Rex, and raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She focused on the child. Vitals are shallow. Jayla, get that warming pad ready. Paul, let's check for trauma, abrasions, bruising, anything. The next few minutes passed in silence, broken only by the soft click of instruments and the faint beeping of the monitor now attached to the baby's chest. The numbers were low, but not zero. Every upward tick on the screen felt like a small breath of air in a drowning room. Outside the bay, David stood with arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his eyes filled with worry. He glanced down at Rex, who hadn't moved a muscle since laying down. Apollo, younger and less experienced, paced back and forth twice before settling beside Rex with a heavy exhale. It was Olivia who spoke first once things stabilized enough for her to breathe. His core temp's coming up. Vitals are shaky but improving. No visible trauma, dehydrated, hungry. He's lucky. David let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He's alive because of that one, Olivia added, nodding subtly toward Rex. Her voice had softened, the sharp edge blunted by curiosity. David gave a slight smile. Rex was K9, retired 2 years ago, still better at reading the world than most of us. Olivia's eyes lingered on the older dog. Rex wasn't looking at her, he was still watching the baby. But there was something haunting in his gaze, something Olivia couldn't quite place. And the other? Apollo, still in training, been shadowing Rex the past 6 months. I've seen service animals before, Olivia said, her voice low, thoughtful. But that look in his eyes, it's like he knows the stakes. David looked down at Rex. He does. Inside the room, the baby let out a faint sound, barely a whimper, more a breath that remembered how to cry. Olivia turned back quickly, checking the monitors again, adjusting a valve with delicate fingers. Jayla handed her a small tube of glucose gel, which Olivia began to administer with care. He's stabilizing, she confirmed. Not out of danger, but the worst might be behind us. From the doorway, Rex's ears perked slightly. Does he usually act like this? Olivia asked. No, David said after a moment. He doesn't sit still unless something matters. Olivia crouched just outside the doorway, a few feet from Rex, careful not to make direct eye contact, but watching him nonetheless. You brought him in, she said softly, almost a whisper. You found him. Rex didn't respond. He didn't wag, didn't move, just blinked, slow and steady. Olivia felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't medical, it wasn't logical. It was something else, something deeper. She had long believed in science, in metrics and data and protocols. But tonight, with a dying child rescued by an old dog who refused to look away, she felt the boundaries of her certainty shift. Later, when Olivia returned to check the monitors again, she left the door slightly open. Not protocol, but somehow, it didn't feel right to shut Rex out. She noticed Apollo inch a bit closer too, until the younger dog could also peer inside. The nurses dimmed the lights. A heater hummed softly. The baby, now bandaged and hooked to monitors, looked less ghostly in the warm light, still frail, still fighting. But there was color in his cheeks now. There was breath. David leaned against the wall outside, finally letting his weight settle. You good? He asked the dogs quietly. Apollo thumped her tail twice. Rex didn't move. David gave a tired smile. And so, the hallway stood still, anchored by 2 silent dogs and the faint whisper of hope rising from a hospital bed. Morning broke over Marlow Creek in a haze of pale gold and low-hanging mist. The hospital's exterior still glowed dimly under its floodlights as dawn stretched slowly across the town, lighting rooftops and pine trees with a sleepy warmth. Inside, the emergency room had settled into a rhythm. Monitors beeped at regular intervals, nurses moved with quiet efficiency, and in one corner of the hallway, 2 German shepherds remained stationed exactly where they had been for hours. David Carter sat on a bench near the vending machines, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. His eyes were heavy, not from exhaustion alone, but from the emotional gravity of the night. He hadn't left the hospital. Neither had Rex or Apollo. The baby was still stable, still fighting. Just as he took another slow sip, his radio crackled. "Chief Carter, this is Deputy Hale. We may have something. Local reported a house down off Hollow Pine Road. Looks like someone's been squatting. Could be related." David stood, straightening his shoulders. "Copy that. I'm on my way. ETA 15. I'll take Rex and Apollo." He clicked off the radio and looked toward the hallway. "Let's move." Rex was up in an instant, ears twitching forward. Apollo followed a beat behind, stretching her front legs in a smooth, instinctive motion, before falling into formation behind her senior. They left the hospital quietly. No fanfare, no questions. Just the three of them returning to the work they knew best. Hollow Pine Road curved along the edge of a thinning woodland on the northern outskirts of town. Years ago, it had been home to several rental cabins, mostly seasonal, mostly forgotten. One of those cabins now stood with its door ajar, paint peeling from the frame, its porch partially collapsed under years of neglect. Deputy Matt Hale was waiting near the perimeter, a young officer with a lean build, cropped blonde hair, and a slightly nervous energy that made him fidget with his belt, even when standing still. At 29, he was still learning the rhythm of real field work, but his instincts were good, and he respected the old-school methods of David and his dogs. "Morning, Chief," Matt said, nodding. "Neighbor called it in, said he heard something moving around yesterday. No one's supposed to be living out here. Looks abandoned, but—" He pointed toward the open door. "Found a broken baby bottle in the kitchen. No sign of anyone now?" David gave a short nod. "Let's check it. Rex, go." The older shepherd moved forward without hesitation, sniffing low as he entered the doorway. The cabin creaked beneath his paws. Apollo followed, staying close to David's left side, her head lowered, every muscle tuned to respond to the slightest cue. She paused briefly at the threshold, sniffing the air, then entered with caution. The inside of the cabin smelled of mildew, mold, and something faintly acidic-spoiled formula, maybe. The living room was strewn with discarded wrappers, an old space heater, and a broken crib tucked into a corner. The fireplace was cold. The walls bore water stains like veins beneath old wallpaper. David stepped in slowly, sweeping a flashlight across the space. "Rex, what do you have?" Rex moved straight to the corner where the crib stood. He sniffed once, then looked back at David, tail stiff, body alert. Apollo moved toward a pile of blankets nearby and began pawing at something buried beneath the fabric. David knelt down and peeled back the layers. A diaper, used, and next to it, a small, soft blue onesie, crumpled and slightly stained. He picked it up carefully, holding it like it might vanish. "That's not all," Matt said quietly from across the room. He was standing near the kitchen door, holding a sheet of paper that looked like it had been torn from a notepad. David crossed the room, taking it gently. The handwriting was shaky pressed too hard into the page, like the writer's hands had been trembling. "I'm sorry. I've run out of food, of heat, of everything. I can't keep him warm anymore. I told Max to find someone who would help. He always listened. I don't know what else to do. I hope one day he'll forgive me." There was no signature, no name, just pain, smeared in ink. David's throat tightened. He stared at the words for a long moment, then turned to Matt. "We'll need to dust for prints. See if any neighbors remember who was here last." Matt nodded and stepped outside to radio it in. Behind him, Apollo had returned to Rex's side, and the two stood now near the crib guarding, a space long abandoned, but still echoing with something human. David let his eyes drift around the room. There were faint shoe prints on the floor, a torn grocery receipt from a discount market across town, and an empty dog food bowl near the window. As he stepped closer, he noticed a faded leather collar folded beside it, too large for a puppy. The tag was gone, but the wear in the leather suggested years of use. "Max," David whispered. She meant Rex. The realization settled over him like a shadow. "She trusted him," he murmured. "She sent him." For the first time since arriving, Rex sat down near the crib, his ears tilted slightly back, his head lowered, not in alertness, but in something that looked startlingly like grief. Apollo sat beside him, their bodies forming a silent boundary between past and present. David remained still for a long time, reading the letter again, eyes tracing the jagged lines. This wasn't just abandonment. This was despair wrapped in love. Whoever the mother was, she hadn't vanished out of cruelty. She had vanished out of hopelessness. He folded the note gently and slipped it into an evidence pouch. "Let's find her," he said quietly. The morning fog had lifted, but the weight of revelation still hung heavy over Hollow Pine Road. David sat quietly in the patrol car, the letter from the cabin folded neatly in his coat pocket. Rex lay curled at his feet, eyes closed but ears alert. Apollo stood with her paws on the passenger side window, nose pressed lightly to the glass, tracking the faint movements of birds beyond the treetops. The cabin behind them had offered no more than what they had already found, no sign of the mother, no trail easy enough to follow, just heartbreak in ink and the ghosts of choices too painful to forget. Back at the precinct, David began assembling a list of prior occupants linked to utility accounts from that area. His fingers tapped slowly across the keyboard, methodical. He paused only to sip stale coffee and review the blurry photos taken from the scene. Jayla, one of the ER nurses from the night before, had sent a quick update about the baby, stable, still under watch. They were calling him Noah until someone came forward with a name. "Let's try a different angle," David murmured, half to himself. He opened up the neighborhood registry and scanned for any long-term residents who might have remembered the previous tenant. Within the minute, one name stood out. Mrs. Eleanor Burns, age 78, had owned the adjacent property for over 40 years. A retired elementary school teacher, Eleanor was known in the department for her letters to city council about potholes and poor lighting. But she had a memory like a vault and was always willing to talk. David arrived at Eleanor's home by late morning, parking beneath the flowering dogwood tree out front. The house was a faded blue two-story, its front porch covered in wind chimes and potted plants. Rex and Apollo trotted at his side as he approached. Eleanor was already waiting at the screen door, a small woman with a halo of curly silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a button-down floral blouse and beige trousers, and she leaned slightly on a worn wooden cane. "You must be here about that poor girl," she said, before David could introduce himself. David gave a respectful nod. "I think you may have known her?" Eleanor pushed the door open wider. "Come in. Both of you too," she added with a warm glance at the dogs. Inside, the house smelled of old books and cinnamon tea. Family photos lined the mantel, black and white weddings, graduation caps, grandchildren in Halloween costumes. Eleanor settled into a rocking chair, while David sat across from her on a creaky couch. Rex lay down instantly, and Apollo remained standing, body alert but calm. "She never told me her name," Eleanor began, voice softer now. "But I saw her come and go for months, always quiet, thin, too thin, kept to herself mostly, but kind, always smiled when I waved." "Did she ever mention family?" David asked. "No, but I saw the bruises once. She was wearing a short-sleeve blouse in October, and her arm was purple, yellow, the color of old fruit, and she flinched when the wind blew too hard." David's jaw tightened. "Did you ever see a man?" "A few times. Big fella, loud, mean. He'd pull up, yell from the porch, and she'd go quiet as a mouse. Next day she'd be limping. I didn't call it in. I should have. I didn't want to make it worse for her." Eleanor wiped her hands slowly against her pants, ashamed. "You're not the only one," David said gently. "We're trying to find her." Eleanor nodded and glanced toward the window. She loved that dog, the shepherd. Max, I think. He was her shadow. Wherever she went, he was there. I saw her one day at the edge of my garden. She bent down, picked a single peony, and tucked it behind the dog's ear. It was the first time I saw her smile. David looked down at Rex, now asleep with one paw over the other, breathing slow and even. "She told Max something that day," Eleanor continued, eyes far away now. "I didn't hear the words, but he stood straighter afterward, like he knew he had a job to do." After another half hour of talking, Eleanor offered David an old cell number, scribbled on a birthday card the girl had accidentally dropped in her mailbox months ago. "It may not work anymore," Eleanor warned, "but it's all I have." David thanked her and stood to leave. Rex rose immediately, as did Apollo. Before stepping out, Eleanor knelt down with some effort and gently patted Rex's head. "You did good, didn't you?" she whispered. "You found the boy." Outside, the spring wind was picking up. David climbed into the cruiser, dialed the number Eleanor gave him, and waited. 1 ring. 2. Then a soft click, but no voice, just static. He left a message anyway. "We have your son. He's safe. He's alive. Please call back." As he hung up, Apollo let out a low, almost imperceptible whine. She was staring down the road. David followed her gaze, but saw nothing. Still, he trusted her instinct. "Let's keep looking," he said. Rex barked once softly. They weren't done yet. The city park stretched across several acres of patchy grass and budding oaks, worn from years of feet, wheels, and weather. It was the kind of place where time felt suspended, where joggers passed the same old statues and children chased pigeons without ever knowing what was truly broken beneath the surface. By early evening, the sun had turned the sky a soft, bruised lavender, streaked with rose-colored clouds that hung low over Marlow Creek. Rachel sat on a weathered bench beneath a dying maple tree. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, ill-fitting and faded layers chosen for warmth, not style. Her hair was matted at the ends, pulled back into a messy bun that had long since lost its shape. Her skin was pale and chapped, her fingernails bitten to the quick. Her face, once likely soft and full of light, was now drawn, the sharp lines of her cheekbones revealed by weeks of stress and hunger. But it was her eyes that struck most. Wide, hollow, glassed over as if she'd seen too much and felt too little in the aftermath. She clutched her arms around herself, rocking ever so slightly. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept properly in more, but none of that mattered, because in her heart, she believed her son was gone, that she had given him away to a silent death in the forest, guided only by the desperate hope that Max, her old friend, might somehow save him. A rustle of footsteps on gravel didn't catch her attention at first. Only when the low, familiar sound of a canine's whine crept into the evening air did she freeze. Across the field, David Carter approached slowly. He wore a dark jacket with the Marlow Creek PD badge gleaming faintly in the dim light. His steps were measured, cautious but not threatening. Rex padded beside him, head held high, gaze fixed on her. Apollo trailed on the other side, slightly behind, ever watchful. Rachel blinked, then blinked again. "Rachel?" David's voice was low, but clear. "My name's David Carter. I'm with the police." She didn't speak. "We found a baby," he continued gently. "In the woods, wrapped in an old blanket. Rex, this dog here led us to him. He's alive." Rachel's body jolted as though someone had pressed a live wire to her spine. She stood too fast, stumbled, then steadied herself. Her lips trembled, but no words came. David took another careful step forward. "He's safe. He's at the hospital. Stable. But he needs you." "My son?" she finally croaked. Her voice was rough, unused, like the hinges of a long-abandoned door. "Noah? He's not—" She choked, then covered her mouth as tears surged. David nodded solemnly. "Yes, Noah." Rachel dropped to her knees, her shoulders convulsed with sobs that were raw, unfiltered, primal. Rex approached her slowly, then stopped just shy of touching her. His eyes, deep, golden, unwavering, met hers. Recognition lit in her face. "Max," she whispered. Rex wagged his tail once, a slow, gentle motion. He stepped closer, nudging her shoulder with his nose. Rachel reached out with shaking hands, burying her face in the thick fur around his neck. "You did it," she sobbed. "You saved him." Apollo moved to her side as well, head tilted, watching the scene unfold with the solemn awareness only service dogs seemed to possess. She didn't touch, didn't intrude, only stood in silent solidarity. David gave her space. After several minutes, when the wave of emotion had passed, he offered his hand to help Rachel up. "We'll take you to him," he said. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Rachel sat in the back of the cruiser, buckled but bent forward, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lips moved in silent prayers or apologies. It was hard to tell. David drove steadily, eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror. Rex sat beside Rachel, occasionally glancing up at her, as if to reassure. Apollo lay at David's feet, alert to every turn, every shift of air, as if still guarding something precious. They arrived just after dark. The hospital lights glowed golden, more welcoming than before. Rachel hesitated outside the doors. Her legs trembled not from cold, but from fear. "What if he doesn't remember me?" she whispered. David shook his head. "Babies remember love, even if they can't say it." Rachel nodded once, wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, and followed him inside. As the elevator ascended to the pediatric unit, Rex stood beside her once again, as he had done so many nights during her darkest hours. When she had no food, no heat, no hope, he had stayed. And now he had brought her home. The hallway leading to the pediatric intensive care unit smelled faintly of antiseptic and new linens. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed in steady rhythm, casting a sterile glow across the pale blue walls. Rachel stood before the glass door, her hands trembling on the silver handle, the hospital bracelet newly fastened around her wrist, reminding her this wasn't a dream. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as her breath caught in her throat. Behind her stood David Carter, calm, patient, his uniform still dusted from the long hours of searching. Apollo sat neatly at his side, alert as ever, head tilted with quiet curiosity. And just to Rachel's right was Rex, her old companion, standing with a stillness that was both regal and deeply familiar. He hadn't moved since they arrived on this floor, his golden brown eyes fixed forward, almost as if he too was holding his breath. Rachel took a step forward. The room inside was quiet, save for the steady rhythm of machines. Noah lay on a small white hospital bed, cradled in soft blankets. He was smaller than she remembered, his cheeks sunken, his arms too thin, but his chest rose and fell. There was color in his lips again. Life. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself on the bed frame before collapsing. Carefully, as though reaching for glass, she placed her fingers on his tiny hand. His skin was warm. His fingers twitched, and then, ever so slightly, his eyelids fluttered. "Noah," she whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "My baby. Mommy's here." Noah blinked, his unfocused eyes landing vaguely in her direction. A soft sound escaped his lips. Not quite a cry, not quite a breath. Rachel broke down. Her sobs were quiet but deep, rocking her entire frame as she laid her forehead gently against his. Outside the room, Olivia Matthews, the lead pediatrician, stood beside David. Olivia was in her early 40s, with rich brown skin and long hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. Known for her sharp mind and even sharper intuition, she rarely let emotion guide her judgment. But this moment was different. She had watched countless reunions, some hopeful, some devastating. But this one unraveled her composure. She turned her head, discreetly wiping a tear from her cheek. "Is that her?" she asked David softly. He nodded. "Rachel, we found her in Marlow Park, alive, but just barely." Olivia's eyes flicked to the two German shepherds. "And that's the dog?" David smiled faintly. "That's Rex. The other's Apollo, still in training." Olivia stepped forward, crouching slightly in front of Rex. "You brought him here, didn't you?" she murmured. Rex tilted his head, tail still, expression solemn. Olivia reached out and gently scratched behind his ear. Rex didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned into her hand. "You're a hero," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. Back in the hospital room, Rachel remained beside Noah. A nurse entered briefly to check the monitors. Susan, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with gray-streaked blonde hair and gentle hands. She adjusted the IV line and offered Rachel a kind smile. "He's getting stronger," she said. "It's going to take time, but he's fighting." Rachel nodded, brushing a lock of hair from Noah's forehead. "He was always strong, stronger than me." Susan paused. "You're here now. That's what matters." Outside the room, Apollo paced gently, tail swishing in quiet arcs. She occasionally nosed Rex's side, checking his stance, his breath, his gaze. Though she was younger, barely 3 years old, Apollo had learned to read the smallest signs in others. She knew something had changed in Rex. He no longer stood like a soldier mid-mission. There was peace in his posture now, like he had completed something sacred. Rex sat down, his head turning slightly to look at Rachel through the glass. His eyes, though ever watchful, seemed softer than usual, mellow with understanding. Rachel finally stood and turned to the door. When she stepped out, her face was flushed and damp with tears, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. Hope. Real, undeniable hope. She knelt slowly in front of Rex, her legs shaking. "You didn't just save him," she whispered. "You saved me too." Rex leaned forward and pressed his head into her chest. Rachel wrapped her arms around him, burying her face into his thick fur, her shoulders trembling. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Olivia, standing nearby, finally let her tears fall freely. "I've treated hundreds of children," she said quietly to David. "But I've never seen anything like this. That dog, he didn't just act on instinct. He loved them, protected them." David nodded. "He always did, even before all this. He was hers once, before she disappeared." Olivia looked between Rachel and Rex, then turned to David. "Then he didn't just bring the baby back. He brought her back too." Rex pulled back just enough to meet Rachel's eyes one more time. Then, without a sound, he turned and sat beside the door again, returning to his quiet post. He would not leave, not until he was certain both of them were safe. Apollo followed suit, lying beside him, head resting gently on her front paws. Two silent sentinels, watching over the family they had fought to reunite. The first morning in the new house was unusually quiet, except for the faint rustle of tree branches against the bedroom window and the creak of the old floorboards beneath Rachel's bare feet. The small rental home sat on the edge of Oak Ridge, a sleepy town in upstate New York, where neighbors still waved from porches and the local market knew your name. The house wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, faded wallpaper. But for Rachel and Noah, it felt like a mansion built on second chances. Rachel stood at the sink, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee. Her long auburn hair, once tangled and lifeless, was now combed and pulled into a neat ponytail. She still bore the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, but there was warmth to her cheeks now, a hint of color returning to a life once grayed by grief. Behind her, laughter echoed faintly. Noah, now stronger by the day, sat on the floor in the living room, surrounded by donated toys. His small hands clutched a stuffed bear, one of many gifts brought by strangers who had been moved by their story. The living room was modestly furnished with second-hand couches and a handmade quilt from a neighbor named Edna, a retired school teacher with silver curls and a warm, no-nonsense demeanor. Edna had taken an instant liking to Rachel, often dropping off baked goods or slipping uplifting notes through the mail slot. As Rachel watched her son play, a knock echoed through the house. Noah turned his head, his little voice perking up. "Doggies?" Rachel smiled softly. "Let's see." She opened the door, and standing outside was Sheriff David Carter in full uniform, his boots dusted with dry mud and his broad frame filling the doorway. On either side of him sat 2 familiar silhouettes, Rex and Apollo. Rex, the older of the two, stood with his usual calm, his golden-brown coat shimmering under the morning sun. Apollo, younger and slightly leaner, had a playful glint in his eyes and a tail that wagged the moment he spotted Noah. "Good morning," David said, tipping his hat slightly. Rachel's voice caught in her throat for a moment, but then she nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Right on time." Noah ran to the door, stumbling slightly on his feet, but too excited to notice. "Rex! Apollo!" The 2 German shepherds trotted in, tails wagging, bodies low to the ground so they wouldn't knock the boy over. Rex lowered his head, allowing Noah to wrap his arms around his neck, while Apollo licked the boy's hand gently. "They missed him," David said, watching the scene unfold. Rachel's eyes glistened as she nodded. "We missed them too." The weekly visits had become tradition since they had left the hospital. Though Rex and Apollo remained active-duty K9s, Sheriff Carter made it a point to bring them by every Saturday morning. The dogs had adjusted back to patrol life with surprising ease. But somehow, whenever they neared Rachel's house, their energy changed. It was like they remembered, and in many ways, they did. Inside, Rachel offered David coffee. He declined as always, choosing instead to sit on the front steps and keep watch while the dogs played. Apollo chased a tennis ball around the yard, while Rex watched over Noah, never more than a few feet away. It was a bond built not on training, but on something deeper recognition, perhaps. Trust. Rachel stepped outside, hands wrapped around her mug. "Do you think they remember it all?" David nodded. "Dogs don't forget loyalty, and neither do people." She sat beside him on the steps, watching her son laugh freely in the grass. "I still dream about the woods sometimes," she admitted. "Not the cold or the fear, just Rex's eyes. The way he looked at me before I left, like he knew. David didn't speak right away. He glanced at Rex, who now lay on his side, while Noah curled up beside him, stroking his thick fur. "He did," David said finally. "He was yours, long before he was ours." Rachel blinked, surprised. "You knew?" "We ran his chip. He was registered to you. You'd adopted him years ago, before you disappeared." David's voice remained steady. "When we found him, he was already being evaluated for retirement, but I think he knew his mission wasn't done." Rachel looked at Rex. The truth landed softly like a long-lost note returning in harmony. She remembered the day she first held him, when he was just a pup trembling at the shelter. She remembered how he would sleep beside Noah's crib, how he'd guard them both during the darkest nights. "I left everything behind," she whispered, "but he never left us." David rose to his feet. "You're not alone anymore." The sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows across the porch. Apollo barked once, chasing a butterfly, while Noah giggled uncontrollably. Rex yawned and stretched out beneath the oak tree, clearly content. As David said his goodbye and gathered the dogs to leave, Noah ran after them. "Rex, stay." David crouched beside the boy. "Rex has to go help other people now, buddy, but he'll come back next week. I promise." Noah nodded slowly, holding onto Apollo's tail one last time before letting go. Rex turned his head as if to reassure the child, then trotted calmly to the cruiser. Rachel stood by the doorway, her heart full, watching them disappear down the road. The world had once felt like it was collapsing beneath her feet, but now it was steady again. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Each week, the visits reminded her, healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to live again with the scars. And Rex and Apollo were living proof that even in the most broken places, love still found a way to return. We don't choose where our story begins, but we can choose who walks beside us as it continues. Rex and Apollo weren't just police dogs. They were silent witnesses to pain, loyal keepers of memory, and quiet healers of broken hearts. They didn't just rescue a child. They rekindled a bond, reunited a family, and reminded us all that even in the coldest moments, love finds a way. In our everyday lives, we often pass by silent heroes, those who watch, wait, and give without asking. Sometimes they have fur and four legs. Sometimes they come when we need them most. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it. Leave a comment below. We'd love to know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story of loyalty, redemption, and hope. May you always be surrounded by kindness, and may God bless you and those you love. Until next time.